Oedipus the king. A plague has stricken Thebes. The citizens gather outside the palace of their king Oedipus, asking him to take action. Oedipus replies that he already sent his brother-in-law, Creon, to the oracle of Delphi to learn how to help the city. Creon returns with a message from the oracle. The plague will end when the murderer of Laius, former king of Thebes, is caught and expelled. The murderer is within the city. Oedipus questions Creon about the murder of Laius, who was killed by thieves on his way to consult an oracle. Only one of his fellow travelers escaped alive. Oedipus promises to solve the mystery of Laius's death, vowing to curse and drive out the murderer. Oedipus sends for Tiresias, the blind prophet, and asks him what he knows about the murder. Tiresias responds cryptically, lamenting his ability to see the truth when the truth brings nothing but pain. At first, he refuses to tell Oedipus what he knows. Oedipus curses and insults the old man, going so far as to accuse him of the murder. These taunts provoke Tiresias into revealing that Oedipus himself is a murderer. Oedipus naturally refuses to believe Tiresias' accusation. He accuses Creon and Tiresias of conspiring against his life and charges Tiresias with insanity. He asks why Tiresias did nothing when Thebes suffered under a plague once before. At that time, a sphinx held the city captive and refused to leave until someone answered her riddle. Oedipus brags that he alone was able to solve the puzzle. Tiresias defends his skills as a prophet, noting that Oedipus's parents found him trustworthy. At this mention of his parents, Oedipus, who grew up in the distant city of Corinth, asks how Tiresias knew his parents. But Tiresias answers enigmatically. Then, before leaving the stage, Tiresias puts forth one last riddle, saying that the murderer of Laius will turn out to be both the father and brother to his own children and the son of his own wife. After Tiresias leaves, Oedipus threatens Creon with death or exile for conspiring with the prophet. Oedipus's wife, Jocasta, also the widow of King Laius, enters and asks why the men shout at one another. Oedipus explains to Jocasta that the prophet has charged him with Laius's murder, and Jocasta replies that all prophecies are false. As proof, she notes that the Delphic oracle once told Laius he would be murdered by his son, when in fact his son was cast out of Thebes as a baby, and Laius was murdered by a band of thieves. Her description of Laius's murder, however, sounds familiar to Oedipus, and he asks further questions. Jocasta tells him that Laius was killed at a three-way crossroads just before Oedipus arrived in Thebes. Oedipus, stunned, tells his wife that he may be the one who murdered Laius. He tells Jocasta that long ago, when he was the prince of Corinth, he overheard some mention of a banquet, that he was not really the son of the king and queen. He therefore traveled to the oracle of Delphi, who did not answer him, but did tell him he would murder his father and sleep with his mother. Hearing this, Oedipus fled his home, never to return. It was then, on the journey that would take him to Thebes, that Oedipus was confronted and harassed by a group of travelers whom he killed in self-defense. This skirmish occurred at the very crossroads where Laius was killed. Oedipus sends for the man who survived the attack, a shepherd, in the hope that he will not be identified as a murderer. Outside the palace, a messenger approaches Jocasta and tells her that he has come from Corinth to inform Oedipus that his father, Polybus, is dead, and that Corinth has asked Oedipus to come and rule there in his place. Jocasta rejoices, convinced that Polybus's death from natural causes has disproved the prophecy that Oedipus would murder his father. At Jocasta's summons, Oedipus comes outside, hears the news, and rejoices with her. He now feels much more inclined to agree with the queen in deeming prophecies worthless and viewing chance as the principle governing the world. But while Oedipus finds great comfort in the fact that one half of the prophecy has been disproved, he still fears the other half, the half that claimed he would sleep with his mother. Messenger remarks that Oedipus need not worry, because Polybus and his wife Merope are not Oedipus's biological parents. The messenger, a shepherd by profession, knows firsthand that Oedipus came to Corinth as an orphan. One day long ago he was tending his sleep when another shepherd approached him, carrying a baby, its ankles pinned together. The messenger took the baby to the royal family of Corinth, and they raised him as their own. That baby was Oedipus. Oedipus asks who the other shepherd was, and the messenger answers that he was a servant of Laius. Dun dun dun. Oedipus asks that this shepherd be brought forth to testify, but Jocasta, beginning to suspect the truth, begs her husband not to seek more information. She runs back into the palace. The shepherd then enters. Oedipus interrogates him, asking who gave him the baby. The shepherd refuses to disclose anything, and Oedipus threatens him with torture. Finally, he answers that the child came from the house of Laius. Questioned further, the shepherd answers that the baby was in fact the child of Laius himself, and that it was Jocasta who gave him the infant, ordering him to kill it, as it had been prophesied that the child would kill his parents. But the shepherd pitied the child and decided that the prophecy could be avoided just as well if the child were to grow up in a foreign city, far from his true parents. The shepherd therefore passed the boy on to the shepherd in Corinth. Realizing who he is and who his parents are, Oedipus screams that he sees the truth and flees back into the palace. The shepherd and the messenger slowly exit the stage. A second messenger enters and describes scenes of suffering. Jocasta has hanged herself, and Oedipus, finding her dead, has pulled the pins from her robe and stabbed out his own eyes. Oedipus now emerges from the palace, bleeding and begging to be exiled. He asks Creon to send him away from Thebes and to look after his daughters Antigone and Ismene. Creon, covetous of royal power, is all too happy to oblige. Oedipus at Colonus. After years of wandering in exile from Thebes, Oedipus arrives in a grove outside Athens. Blind and frail, he walks with the help of his daughter Antigone. Oedipus and Antigone learn from a citizen that they are standing on holy ground reserved for the Eumenides, goddesses of fate. Oedipus sends the citizen to fetch Theseus, the king of Athens and its surroundings. Oedipus tells Antigone that earlier in his life, when Apollo prophesied his doom, the god promised Oedipus that he would come to rest on this ground. After an interlude in which Oedipus tells the chorus who he is, Oedipus's second daughter, Ismene, enters, having gone to learn news from Apollo's oracle at Delphi. She tells him that back in Thebes, Oedipus's younger son, Eteocles, has overthrown Polynices, the elder son, and that Polynices is now amassing troops in Argos for an attack on his brother and on Creon, who rules along with Eteocles. The oracle has predicted that the burial place of Oedipus will bring good fortune to the city in which it is located, and both sons, as well as Creon, know of this prophecy. Both Polynices and Creon are currently en route. They're on their way to try and take Oedipus into custody and thus claim the right to bury him in their kingdoms. Oedipus swears he will never give support to either of his sons, for they did nothing to prevent his exile years ago. King Theseus of Athens arrives and says that he pities Oedipus for the fate that has befallen him, and he asks how can he help Oedipus. Oedipus asks Theseus to harbor him to keep him safe in Athens until his death, but warns that by doing him this favor, Theseus will incur the wrath of Thebes. Despite the warning, Theseus agrees to help Oedipus. Creon appears in order to abduct Oedipus, but proving unsuccessful, he kidnaps Antigone and Ismene instead. Theseus promises to Oedipus that he will get his daughters back. Theseus does, in fact, return with Oedipus's daughters shortly. Soon after, Polynices arrives, seeking his father's favor in order to gain custody of his eventual burial site. Oedipus asks Theseus to drive Polynices away, but Antigone convinces her father to listen to his son. Polynices tells Oedipus that he never condoned his exile, that Eteocles is the bad son, having bribed the men of Thebes to turn against Polynices. Oedipus responds with a terrible curse, upbraiding his son for letting him be sent into exile and predicting that Eteocles and Polynices will die at one another's hands. Polynices, realizing he will never win his father's support, turns to his sisters. He asks that they provide him with a proper burial should he die in battle. Antigone embraces Polynices, saying that he is condemning himself to death, but he resolutely says that his life remains in the hands of the gods. He prays for the safety of his sisters and then leaves for Thebes. Terrible thunder sounds, and the chorus cries out in horror. Oedipus says that the time of his death has come. Sending for Theseus, he tells the king he must carry out certain rites on his body, and that by doing so he may assure divine protection to his city. Theseus says he believes Oedipus and asks what to do. Oedipus answers that he will lead the king to the place where he will die, and that Theseus must never reveal that spot, but pass it on to his own son at his own death, who in turn must pass it on to his own son. In this way, Theseus and his heirs may always rule over a safe city. Oedipus then strides off with sudden strength, taking his daughters and Theseus to his grave. A messenger enters to narrate the mysterious death of Oedipus. His death seemed a disappearance of sorts. The lightless depths of earth bursting open in kindness to receive him. Just as the messenger finishes his story, Antigone and Ismene come on stage chanting a dirge. Antigone wails that they will cry for Oedipus as long as they live. Not knowing where to go now, Antigone says they will have to wander forever alone. Theseus returns to the stage, asking the daughters to stop their weeping. They plead to see their father's tomb, but Theseus insists that Oedipus has forbidden it. They give up their pleas, but ask for safe passage back to Thebes so that they may prevent a war between their brothers. Theseus grants them this, and the chorus tells the girls to stop their weeping, for all rests in the hands of the gods. Theseus and the chorus exit toward Athens. Antigone and Ismene head for Thebes. Character list. Oedipus, the protagonist of Oedipus the king and Oedipus at Colonus. Oedipus becomes the king of Thebes before the action of Oedipus the king begins. He's renowned for his intelligence and ability to solve riddles. He saved the city of Thebes and was made king by solving the riddle of the Sphinx, the supernatural being that had held the city captive. Yet Oedipus is stubbornly blind to the truth about himself. His name's literal meaning, swollen foot, is the clue to his identity. He was taken from the houses of Laius as a baby and left in the mountains with his feet bound together. On his way to Thebes, he killed his biological father, not knowing who he was, and proceeded to marry Jocasta, his biological mother, not knowing who she was either. Read the rest of this character list. There's not that much, and there are a few more answers for your closed notes.